somehow in some people's minds, we think that yoga is exempt from being a business, or it's like, well, it's yoga and my teacher and it's the style and it was given to me from my lineage from thousands of years and unbroken teachings. And this is pretty much not the case in most modern yoga styles. When capitalism is in the mix and we try to make money off of these practices, and what sometimes makes money is charismatic teachers who are at the top of a so-called lineage. British rule and colonial rule in India affected the practice, this wisdom tradition, and then in the way that it came over to the West has that. When it's revolving around a charismatic top person, that really is a smart business move. And I'm saying, I don't agree with this business move.
I am excited about today's conversation. We're going to talk about lineage. So many yoga teachers start in a structured lineage or style, but eventually find themselves teaching outside of that. I was thinking of myself even moving into a studio, being told to teach a specific style of class if I wanted to get the job, which was really hard for me. So we're going to be talking about how to grow beyond your training without losing confidence. And one of the reasons I wanted to talk to you about it is obviously you teach yoga teacher training. So I think you're the perfect person for this, especially with your decades of experience. Could you kind of describe even what lineage is, just in case someone's coming to our podcast is unsure? What does it mean to follow a lineage? What does it mean to start in a lineage and style? And kind of why can it feel limiting once you're in that world of teaching outside of your teacher training?
Yeah, let's start with lineage. You're right. Lineage is an interesting concept in yoga because I think there's, in my opinion, there's a difference between lineage and style. And even lineage might feel a little bit different. And there's a lot of, this is an interesting one because I'm thinking back to my early days of teaching. So this was the early days of practicing yoga. So I started yoga, practicing in 1998 and teaching in 2003. And I feel at those times it was really a lot more on the lineage and a lot more. And then over the 2 decades, then it became a little bit more about yoga style because different yoga styles sort of arrived on the scene. I feel like, if I'm remembering it correctly, yin yoga didn't exist, at least that I remember noticing. It might have, but in Bree's little yoga world that I lived in the early 2000s, I don't remember there ever being such a thing about what yin is. So I would say yin, as an example, is a style of yoga. Lineage might be referring more to the teachings of the practice, who are your teachers? Who are your teachers in this lineage? And our most common modern lineage is going back to, you could say, starting with Krishnamacharya at the turn of the century. Well, which century? Because we turned a century back in 2000. So Krishnamacharya was kind of what some people consider to be the godfather of yoga in the West. He was the teacher of Pattabhi Jois, who created the style of yoga, which is Ashtanga yoga. He was also the teacher of Iyengar, who created the style of Iyengar. And I think some people would say Iyengar yoga, Ashtanga yoga is a lineage. But, and so this is my personal bias in this. I think so in my mind, I feel like they're different, but I'm also somebody who's a little bit more radical in the sense where I want to respect the practice and tradition of yoga, but I want to respect it from a longer tradition that, this thousands-year-old tradition that's gone through many different iterations and has made its way through here in the West. And as we always talk about, and I really was hoping in this call that it wouldn't come back to systems of power, but you can't talk about the history of yoga without acknowledging the colonial and imperial impact of it, right? The British rule and colonial rule in India affected the practice, this wisdom tradition, and then in the way that it came over to the West has that. So I think these words like lineage and style and tradition are just really kind of sticky. So I'm just acknowledging some of the bigger context. because also the lineage, sometimes these lineages of some of the teachers are kind of problematic too, right? They can get a little bit, um, yeah, when capitalism is in the mix and we try to make money off of these practices, and what sometimes makes money is charismatic teachers who are at the like top of a so-called lineage, but who are actually having behavior that's quite questionable, and I'm going to say cult-like. And yeah, so that's my as always, never a clear black and white answer. But I think when we come to, so let's kind of leave that in the beautiful gray zone of like just acknowledging the cultural conditions of the world and how these things still show up with the systems of power in the world and how yoga is not immune to that. And now, so when we talk about yoga styles, I start to think they're a little bit, again, we start to maybe think about more, again, like that capitalistic impact of, I'm thinking Anusara yoga. So some people back in the day, I don't know if that even still exists. Does anybody still practice Anusara? I think it's sort of like burned bright and then burned out. Had a short, relative short thing, because it was very, I think that's maybe a good example getting us quickly into this. Anusara yoga, my friends, I never fully, disclaimer, I never really took an Anusara class. Maybe I've taken an Anusara adjacent class, but I never studied it. This is just more being in the yoga world and seeing it. It was run by a man named John Friend, and he kind of created this style, and people taught and were certified in it. And it was really popular. And if I'm remembering correctly, I believe as always, the charismatic leader starts being questionable. And maybe there were some sexual assault allegations. I don't, again, those listening, this is out of my, I don't know the details, but something caused him to fall and this Anusara lineage to implode. And see, I even just used the word lineage right there. And I feel like was it a lineage or was it just a style this guy kind of created? Like, hey, let's bring this yoga and like bring these other aspects into the practice. And then we're going to do it. And then we're going to call it Anusara. And then I'm going to train people in this Anusara certification. And now you're not just a yoga teacher, but you're a Anusara yoga teacher. And so so lineage, style, all kind of the same thing. And in my opinion, and for me as a teacher, I teach yoga. We all teach yoga. And what I really try to do is say, I teach an approach to yoga that for me is, so this is what I say personally, because this is how I teach. I teach an approach to yoga, and especially yoga asana, let's be specific here, that's anatomy informed, which in the anatomy informed approach helps make it more inclusive. So it's an approach where we really focus, where it's less about the poses, more about the person in the pose, right? But that's not attached to a lineage. It's not attached to a person style. I sure as hell do not want it to be Heart and Bones lineage or Brie Johnson. Like, no, thank you. So this is so that's kind of my big answer.
I think this is I mean, so many things are popping up in my mind. One of them being like how important it is to pick I would say like your initial teacher training, because it can really set off the path of like what your career as a teacher can feel like, or the direction it goes. Like, do you want to, because I also battled with this. Like, I was looking at a studio that had like a very distinct style, and I think they were trying to show their lineage like in towards Ashtanga, but like a new development of Ashtanga, if you know what I mean, and did have that kind of guru at the top of it. So I was looking at that, or did I want to go with something more like a Heart and Bones, where it was like a foundational teacher training, and that's actually the choice I went with. And after I did the foundational training, then I chose to add on styles and kind of get a broader education where you can top up on your education. You could do a 50 or 25-hour, training in different things. I think there's also another thing that not beyond, but I think now you mentioned kind of the business of yoga, and there are now studios who sell their teacher trainings as the only way to be able to teach at that studio. And as a business owner, you are fully allowed to do that, because you might have, expectations like, this is the sequence we teach, this is the expectations of the studio. But it is interesting because it starts to kind of almost like muddy the water. Like, are you selling the teacher training to offer teacher training to people, or is it just like, like you're never going to have enough open positions for these teachers. And I don't think yoga is the only place that does this. I think, like, I've heard it's common like the Pilates world as well. But just like broadly looking at different studios, like I know spin studios, what they tend to do is they cover the cost of the training, and it's seen as like an audition. So then if you make it through your audition, you got training, but you might not get the job, but you didn't pay for the training. At least that's how I knew one studio did it, versus I think like teacher training, it's like you're paying thousands of dollars thinking you have a potential of teaching. And I wanted to talk about this because I think, especially for those teachers who might feel like, oh, I only learned this one style. Like, I don't feel comfortable. It's not a foundational training. I only know this one set sequence. We didn't go, into these other things. And yeah, we've talked in the past about the yoga world being not that regulated. Like, it is, and it 100% is not. Like, you can, like, yeah. So I just was, yeah, that's where I kind of was going in my head.
Okay, I got
From
lots
your
of okay.
Okay, good. So you go in. I'm like, I'm not even gonna ask the next question.
Well, yeah,
I'm
because
gonna
I
let
think
myself peter out.
yeah. Well, I love that because I think you said so. You touched on so many good things though that I was like, ooh, and then you're like, then another thing, I'm like, ooh. So if I can remember some of the things that were the ooh, I think you naming about the yoga teacher trainings and studios and having to make money, like absolutely. And I think also, and that's fair. That's totally fair. But then this question of like yoga lineage and yoga tradition or yoga teacher, like there's this other layer of fine. We got to do teacher trainings. People want to teach. So let's offer teacher trainings. But when it's when it's revolving around a charismatic top person, that really is a smart business move. And I'm saying, like, I don't agree with this business move, but it's actually quite smart because when you can create cult like followings, when you can create a culture of, hey, let's all do this thing, and ooh, now I'm a blank style teacher, without going, like my friends, we will do a cult episode eventually because I feel like we always keep circling around these deeper conversations of like cult dynamics in the yoga world. So I'm going to try to stay here a little bit more surface going, like, I think it's because it's sticky. There's something sticky about that because it gives us a perception of belonging, and it helps give us a sense of identity, especially as new practitioners or teachers. If you're certified to teach in a certain style of yoga, that kind of gives you a really nice blueprint of like the words I should say, the types of things I should be as a teacher. And when you named, Ula, about the foundational types of training, I think that was a really important point here, because I think that sometimes isn't really realized for a lot of new people going into teacher training and questioning about this stuff about a yoga style, is that actually, in my opinion, it's super helpful to have foundational trainings. And so what is a foundational training? I think it is the ones that we mentioned already, where it's less about any attachment to a teacher or style. It's really giving us the basic foundations of the practice of yoga, the experience of anatomy and movement, not just, well, anatomy and movement in regards to how I should teach these specific yoga asanas, and therefore take those yoga asanas and say all those same cues for every body that comes into my room, into my class. That's not foundational. That's just adapting the poses or people to the poses. So foundational equals, okay, I'm getting a good basic understanding of like human movement that I can build into a pose, or I can regress that pose to fix and work with the people, not fix, but adapt and support the people in my classes. So I think that's a really good way to acknowledge. Start with the foundations. And then, just as Ula said, go ahead and add like, oh, I should do this little yin, if yin is something you want to do, for example. Do a 20-hour yin training, or add on this meditation training, or add on this vinyasa flow training. But I think it's quite limiting for us and the people that we teach if we kind of stick with just one style, because a style is like a flavor. A style is kind of, at this day and age, it's a brand. If we just want to name names, it's a brand under the guise of yoga. And I use that floaty voice like yoga because there's that spiritual materialism around it of, because yoga somehow in some people's minds, we think that yoga is exempt from being a business, or it's like, well, it's yoga and my teacher and it's the style. And it was given to me from my lineage from thousands of years and unbroken teachings. And this is pretty much not the case in most modern yoga styles. Aren't pure like that. I don't know if that totally exists. It would be so lovely and so romanticized to like practice, but that's also kind of appropriation and exotification of this tradition. And I'm just going to name that a little bit because it comes, if you're not of South Asian descent, right, and you're a practitioner and teacher teaching this tradition that's come from India, that's already been quite whitewashed and quite appropriated, just know that that desire for that sort of mystical experience of like my teacher, this unbroken tradition, it's not, yeah, it's a little more complex. My goodness, I really, really sometimes wish I could make everything more simple and like, yes, Ula, here's the 5 things of the question that you asked. But I hope those of you who continue to listen to our yoga teacher podcast here start getting comfortable with these questions and these bigger picture ideas that always seem to pop up into these conversations, almost virtually every conversation, because I think this gray area is also where the magic is. And really tying this back to the question of lineage and style, I think it's right on line with that because, again, as a lineage, a certain, and I'm going to use the word religion here, religions give you a very clear, I'm this religion. And these are the very clear boundaries, and these are the very clear delineations and identities and words that we use. And it is harder to be in the gray zones. It is harder in some ways not to have a style of yoga that you're teaching. And that's okay. We want labels. That's a good way to say.
We want labels. That's very human. I think it's very, yeah, we want labels. Like, I think it's very human to be like, pick your lane you know, not the same, but the same is like, you know, when I say I'm a creative and people are like, oh, what do you do? And I'm like, oh boy, I wish I could just tell you one thing, but I do these 15 things. I think it's the same thing in anything we do, right? I just wanted to also, I guess, mention that just because you go, okay, I mentioned like the business of yoga. We've kind of been talking about that. And also, I think you can just take teacher training for yourself. I think sometimes when we hear yoga teacher training, we think everyone going into teacher training wants to be a teacher. And really, I think a lot of people going into teacher training are also just like extending what it means to be a student. So there's like becoming a teacher is just like another level of being a student. And so you can take your foundational training and then you can take all the trainings you want and you can continue growing and you can continue exploring your own practice and you never have to teach a class. Like I never planned to teach a class when I took my teacher training. So having that in the back of your mind, because I'm thinking of the people who are like, oh, but I loved my studio and that's why I took teacher training with them. And I'm like, we're not like knocking it. Like I just want to be careful in that sense. It's like teaching or taking training can also be an extension of your practice. So there is that side of it. But I think it's good to have this conversation to be aware of these structures and kind of like where the background
Yeah.
is.
And you also, I think too, naming that, because I think I was going off a little bit of like, well, that charismatic teacher. And you might literally have a teacher who's like charismatic. And you're like, I love this teacher. I want to do the teacher training with them. Like that, in my opinion, is different than like the charismatic, like guru, like things of like, you can have a friendly, outgoing, wonderful teacher that you want to do a training with. That's, I think, different than,
I'm laughing. It's like, you know, what popped in my head was, every cactus is a succulent, but not every succulent is a cactus. So it's the same idea of like, you can have a lovely, good, charismatic teacher you want to take training with. It doesn't mean that they're like bad and have a system that's like hierarchical. Like, you know what I mean? Like, we're not saying all teachers are bad. We're just saying it's good to know that this exists in the yoga world and maybe doing a little bit of research and digging into things. And ultimately, I didn't take my training with that specific studio because once I started talking to students who had previously gone through their training, shocking, realized they're doing little culty things. Like one thing they did was make people stand for like 8 hours without moving until they basically broke down and started crying. And I thought that's a textbook like cult thing to do. You physically
To
break people
rebuild them
down
up.
so they mentally, yes. And I thought, no,
That's a
that's a
cult.
cult.
Yeah.
So I didn't go
Yeah.
with that. I do want to kind of pull it back a little bit for our teachers. Do you have any advice for them about like if they are feeling maybe a little bit boxed in by their training right now? Is there anything that they can do if they're kind of wanting to evolve or try new styles? Is there anything you can think
Try
of?
just to go do it. Like there's no rule or yoga police out there saying you did this one training in this one style and now you are stuck doing it for the rest of your life. Oh my goodness. I feel, again, we're all wired differently. So I think there's some people who probably love the like nervous system safetyness of, okay, I know it, like I'm teaching this one style. This is the poses that I do. And if that's you and like you have no desire to change, like please stay as you are if that feels right. And I think for a lot of teachers, it's helpful to continue to branch out. Like I've always said this both for myself taking courses and teaching and offering courses, teacher trainings, is that like your teacher training, one teacher training cannot rule them all. It's impossible. And so can like have your training as your certification. Now you've got your little piece of paper, like, yay, I'm allowed to teach. And then if another full certification works and it's with a school and a people that you enjoy, go do that. But your teaching never stops or your learning never stops at just one training ever. We're going to evolve and grow. We're going to be teaching classes and we're going to see different types of people coming into our classes that we're like, oh, wait, I don't know how to actually work with that type of body or injury or whatever it might be. And then you go and you pursue that interest and you go into that little fun rabbit hole for a while and take some more different styles or approaches. And it's this sort of beautiful buffet of education. Like continue learning. And in fact, my classic yoga origin story that I'm sure many of you, if you've been listening to this podcast for a while, is that my yoga existential crisis era drew me to taking courses outside of yoga that I was able to bring back into yoga. So specifically meaning like anatomy and biomechanics style courses that I was then able to take that information and bring it to yoga. So sometimes that's going to be appropriate too, is to leave the yoga boxes and find things that will help integrate it for you.
I am going to shamelessly plug you on this one. Brie also does move and learn classes within our online yoga studio. And I know in my mind, when I took my 200-hour and then I found out, oh, you're gonna like be a student now for forever, I was a little bit like, oh shoot, I have to spend like so much money on this like continued education. So I do understand there's gonna be people out there who are like, maybe I can't invest every year, the hundreds or thousands of dollars to take a 50-hour or additional 200-hour, 300-hour training. There are other ways. And I know for myself, that was through like attending workshops that were specific with people that were experts in their field, or something like the move and learn classes with Brie. So you get to get that education through just a subscription, which I absolutely love. So there are other avenues. Like once you get that foundational training, to really have like a student mindset and always be learning.
Yeah, it doesn't have to cost you thousands of dollars every year, or that you have to pay dues. That's another little red flag, I think. If you're part of a yoga style that forces you to pay dues in order to maintain your certification, this is Brie's opinion, FYI, all the time. But to me, I'm like, that irks me deeply because it's like, no. Okay, we all got to make money at this business, sure. But no, don't make me spend money on keeping the name of this style. I think that goes beyond some of the principles of yoga and dips too further into capitalism than I personally enjoy.
A franchisee model.
Yeah.
Essentially what it is.
Man, I'd be like a millionaire if we did that with Heart and Bones, But no, it's like, because even with the teacher training, so using this as a model, like we've been running our teacher trainings as of now, this is going to be our 8th year, like hundreds of students around the world that have been certified with us. But I'm like, no, make this your own. Like, that's why foundational is really important. It's like, we've given you the building blocks. We've given you this, like, hopefully a really wonderful, inspiring foundation for you then to kind of create it yourself. And I don't need you to be like, this is Heart and Bones TM, and you have to pay us hundreds of dollars. Though that would be nice, but that's, but ethically, no, I don't know. Anyways.
Okay, so all of this said now, we've kind of touched on kind of the student mindset. Do you think there's like a practical first step a teacher can take if they are nervous about going beyond their original teacher training?
I would say immediately in my mind, it's like trust that you are teaching yoga. No matter what approach or style it is, you are teaching yoga. You are teaching yoga. And it is enough to say that you are teaching yoga. Right. Because I feel like, even in my early days, while there were still yoga styles, but there was also like hatha yoga. So there was also this thing about like, which I thought was really interesting, that on our yoga studio schedules, you would see like a flow class, a hatha class, uh, Ashtanga class or something. And it was this weird jumble because all of the physical asana, according to the yoga education, right? The yoga philosophies and education, it's like any asana, the physical practice of yoga is yoga, hatha yoga. And then, so the hatha classes was technically every physical class, whether it was Ashtanga, whether it was flow, is technically hatha. But then it gets again twisted into like, well, no, now it's Anusara, now it was Iyengar, and Hatha just was sort of like the place where you didn't really do much in. They were just like doing yoga poses, or where all the old ladies. This is me in the early 2000s of what the vibe of Hatha classes in my experience, right? The old people would go and do Hatha, and it was really silly. And so bottom line, and so then of course with our teacher training, so many of our graduates, we have this conversation every year of like, how do I explain what style of yoga do I teach? And I always say, you're allowed to say you teach yoga. And then I follow it up with, I teach an approach to yoga that integrates movement education, let's say, or that integrates mobility. So I think that's kind of the easiest ones, is no matter what you're doing, you are teaching yoga. And then you can say, and I sometimes teach yin, and I sometimes teach flow classes, or if you're more kind of broad like me, it's like I teach yoga and I teach an approach to yoga that involves blah 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 blah. So it really doesn't have to be much more complex.
Yeah, and it's funny because most teachers are going to probably teach at a studio that offers a variety of classes. And I personally, when I was teaching within the studio system, never really had much of an option of what kind of class I got to teach. You were just like given a slot and kind of almost like the energy level for that time, because the studio is a business and they know certain times of day certain things work. So late night you're probably going to get a yin, early morning you're probably going to get an energetic flow, get people going for their day, and you kind of work within that system. Okay, so the big takeaway is like trusting that you're actually teaching yoga no matter the style that you originally taught. Be a student. This is your practice as well. Is there anything else you would add on to that?
Yeah, I think continue to explore and be okay with these gray areas, right? Of just these complexities of it can feel more comforting to be part of a style or a lineage or a tradition. And if that feels true for you, like I don't want to take that away at all, right? Like we are gifted with so many possibilities and opportunities in this world. And if something for a time, for the whole length of your yoga practice feels really good, and you want to, Ashtanga's coming off the top of my head. And if that's what you want to practice and teach for 30, 40 years, stick with that. If that feels wonderful, if your body is happy, your mind and practice, everything's happy doing it, yes. And you also have permission to not be defined by a style if that also doesn't resonate for you, because we are more than these styles. We are all teaching this deeper practice of yoga that hopefully at the heart of it really reminds us of how connected we all are to each other. And so instead of having that kind of subtle division perspective, because I even feel like back in my early days, there was a little bit of this hierarchy or judgment on like what kind of style you practiced or taught. you know, of like, oh, you teach Ashtanga, you practice, and then you're just like slotted into this, like, oh, you're that kind of person or you're that kind of teacher. And it's so beautifully human. Beautifully human. We like to have those tribal kind of identity things. But when we're really sincerely involved in going deeper into ourself, which is that practice of yoga outside of asana. And asana can help find us there, but the practice is more than that. Yeah, I think we start to realize, wait a second, it's all yoga. It's all the same. We're all the same. We're all connected. I'm not better. You're not better. That style's not better. It's all here. We, without it sounding so trite, but we are all one. We are.
Okay, so I know during the episode we did mention the online studio and our own yoga teacher training. So I'm gonna definitely link that in the show notes below if you're curious and want to explore. We kick off yoga teacher training 200 and 300 hour this fall. Depending on when you listen to this, just have a click. We always update our website to be accurate for the next training. So no matter when you listen to this, you can still learn more about it. Or you can just email us, reach out. We love to talk about this stuff, obviously.
Yeah, we also do independent studies. So if you're listening to this and it's like we're already halfway through the current cohort, because it's online, you can join early and get ahead on some of the online materials, and then join the live courses and classes with a subsequent cohort. So email and say, hey, independent studies.
Love it. Well, thank you so much, Bree.
Thank you.